Hey, welcome to 2023, the Smarketing Show. We're pleased to have Joe Brunsman with us, best-selling author, public speaker, cybersecurity guru, all those good things. And Rick, happy to be back with you in the saddle here.
Yeah, it's great to be back. I saw Joe speak twice in the last, I'm going to say 3 or 4 months, once at a dealership in Minneapolis and the second time at the Executive Connection Summit. So Joe, great job. Today, if you're a viewer, we titled this thing like how to help you sell cybersecurity. And it's great to have Joe on because Joe's an insurance specialist in this space. And, Joe, when I heard you talk at the Executive Connection Summit, great event, by the way, in Phoenix, I thought you did an awesome job. People are still talking about, some of the information you shared there, specifically how CEOs are now responsible for their cybersecurity kind of vulnerability or impacts that happen. And you talked a lot about how insurance companies are really making moves to change the game in their favor in terms of how their contracts and things are set up, and really how today's business leaders naive, I would say, as to what really is going on, never mind the increase in cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities. So we wanted to have you on today to support people that are selling cybersecurity. So maybe you could talk about some of the trends you're seeing from the insurance perspective, because I think that's the undercurrent that's really creating a compelling reason for companies, if they're not already, to revisit their cybersecurity posture. Sorry for the long intro there, but what are you seeing happening right now from an insurance perspective?
Hey, thank you guys, and good to be with you. Appreciate the glowing intro there. So I would say, I started my insurance journey on the E&O side, professional liability. And really what we're seeing here is they're squishing about 40 years of traditional policy evolution, into 5 years effectively. So we're seeing very rapid changes really across the board. So, not only are we seeing a rise arguably in the frequency of cyber events, the severity of cyber events, but we're also seeing on the cyber insurance policy side, we're seeing increasing demands for specific controls be put in place. We are seeing entire industries just get cut off from various cyber insurance companies. And then we're seeing a ton of additional exclusions being put onto the policy. And so, how many business owners actually read their cyber insurance policy? I would say, despite my pleadings, not many, maybe single digit percentages. I'm always really happy when someone comes back and they're like, hey, I read this, I have a question there. So, kind of some of the big ticket items that we're seeing, those fundamental cybersecurity controls, they're always going to be in vogue, no matter how many people write an article saying that antivirus is dead. The insurance industry hasn't gotten there yet, right? So, things like backups, immutable backups, object locked permanence, 3-2-1 backup strategies, mapping to a framework, having a password policy, all of those kind of fundamentals. We're seeing just at a basic level, if you don't have those in place, MFA, 2FA for email access, remote network access as well. What we're seeing here is if you don't have those in place, that's a big problem for an organization. And if you're a cyber insurance company and you have all of these policyholders that have much more sophisticated control schemes in place, and you're losing money on those guys, why would you ever write insurance for somebody that doesn't have Duo on their phones, as an example, right? Like, you would be insane to do that. Another thing we're seeing is or I should take a step back. What controls are being mandated? It just depends. It depends on the client, how big they are, what their internal mechanisms and controls are, what industry they're in, what their particular insurance company has as like the flavor of the month. I mean, it's kind of jumping all over the place. But what I would tell people is you have to start getting proactive about cybersecurity. All right. So don't wait until 2 weeks beforehand to say, oh, I need EDR on 95% endpoints suddenly. Right. Like, that's just, it's not going to work. And so what we're seeing, like from the broker side, which is where I work, is so many people are trying to get cyber insurance. The cost is going up so quickly that people are trying to shop the cyber insurance policies around the marketplace. The underwriters are just overwhelmed. And so I have the personal cell phone numbers of a lot of these underwriters at the various cyber insurance companies. And I'm calling these guys. I'm like, hey, I have a $50 million grossing client. Their cyber policy renews in 2 weeks. Where's the quote?
Mhm.
And they're like, oh, I'll get to it. Right. So let's say you're a $50 million company. You think you're going to get special treatment. Oh, no, you're not. And you may not know until 10 days beforehand that suddenly you need this new control. In which case, I'm a former IT guy myself. So good luck getting that implemented. Right. So the name of the game is get proactive. The requirements are coming. You want to very comfortably say, hey, we're meeting these requirements long before an insurance company places those requirements upon you, or you just won't have enough time.
If you're watching or listening right now, the one thing I think we may have missed is the fact that you were an IT guy and now
Yeah.
you're actually an insurance provider specializing in cybersecurity. So just that perspective as you talk, you've got, the ultimate combination there to educate people, which is why we're excited to have you on. Anyway, so think of Joe as an insurance guy, not just an IT guy here talking. Go ahead, buddy.
Oh, so I was going to add, there's a bunch of additional exclusions being put on policies now. So things like legacy hardware and software exclusions, right? Or there's been a bunch of exclusions on these policies for years that nobody's really ever spoken about because, let's be honest, insurance guys, we are not the brightest bulb in the financial services box, right? So my side of the equation has been doing an awful job actually explaining what the limitations in these policies actually are. So something like a legacy hardware software exclusion, right? If you're not sitting down with your MSP for your QBR, your quarterly business review, and going through and saying, okay, hey, what's coming up to be end of life here? You're really in a bad spot, right? And I'm the only one dorky enough to actually read these policies cover to cover. You could have outdated software there, right? Where let's say you have a server, it's no longer supported. Bad guy comes through that server. Hey, you may not have cyber insurance. Same with some piece of compromised software, something that's no longer supported. We're now seeing patching requirements, right? Which is effectively that's just going to force companies, right? All those SMBs out there, you're going to have to get an MSP because I'll say as a former IT guy myself, if you have some exclusion on your policy that says, hey, if you don't patch this critical vulnerability, if it's a specific score or higher within so many days, right, you're not going to have coverage. One, the question is, does the IT guy even know that exists? Probably not, because the business owner probably doesn't know that exists. And then two, can he even feasibly make that happen? And it depends, right? So, I know plenty of businesses where they are very seasonal, right? So like an accounting firm, for an example. Tax season comes around and kind of the general name of the game is you don't touch the computer system because people are working like 18 hours a day. There's no updates, there's no patches, nothing until tax season is over. Well, now that just can't happen anymore. And even assuming that they have an in-house IT folk, they're keeping track of this MITRE list and CVEs and CVSSs, et cetera, would he even have time to feasibly do that? Probably not, right? Because, Microsoft comes out with a new patch, they're the 600-pound gorilla in the room. They don't care if it breaks everything else. It's everybody else's problem to work around that patch. And so invariably, Patch Tuesday came around. We're sitting there working, we're patching systems, we're testing things. Something breaks, some of those patches get moved to next week. And it just kind of, you have this cascading effect, right? So for the average business, that's just going to force them to actually hire an MSP. It's too much work, right?
So let me ask you this: if you were to sell cybersecurity, okay, so put yourself, you understand the insurance side, you understand the IT side, certainly, and you were in a sales position trying to approach a company and sell them cybersecurity services. May I ask, like, what your strategy might be, or what you would say, who you might engage with in the company? You know what I mean? From a strategic standpoint, we want to talk to this position and this kind of the message that you would deliver if you were a salesperson, Joe.
I would probably start off, and obviously I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I would start off with the general term would be like risk manager, or really whoever is in charge of procuring the cyber insurance for that organization,
Mhm.
because that I think is going to start driving a lot of the conversation. That's at least how I would approach it, just given my kind of background here.
Traditionally, we've coached salespeople to go after the business owner, the finance leader who, we think is going to be impacted.
Mhm.
But that's a completely different target that, I think isn't on most people's radar. So great point.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, when we're talking about cybersecurity, as a great example, let's say you go to the risk manager, right? And you're like, hey, I'd like to make sure that you're compliant with one, what you put on that application, which is questionable, and two, that you're compliant with whatever's in your policy, right? So the fun fact that most people don't know, and this is, how would I put it? Shocking to most people, right? Absent a special relationship, which generally you don't have with an insurance guy,
Mhm.
he has no legal requirement to understand what he's selling you, to even have read what he is selling you, to train you on that policy, provide alternatives, et cetera, et cetera. So there are plenty of risk managers who are just going, well, hey, I got a cyber policy. I
Mhm.
checked that box. They may not understand that there are these exclusions hidden on page 80, whatever, that they've never contemplated.
Mhm.
I have never, there's so many ways that could go sideways. I would say, hey, start there and just go, okay, what's on the application? What's on the policy? Right. Let's go from there. Now let's say, okay, here's what's coming down the pike. And just kind of start going through that mechanism, because, they may think that they have coverage for a ransomware event, but that's not technically the case here in the US. We have something called an OFAC exclusion, right? So I would just sit down with them and, review it first, sit down, ask them questions and be like, okay, do you know what this OFAC exclusion means?
Mhm.
The answer is 99.9% no,
Mhm.
right? The answer is, okay, well, it might be illegal to pay the ransom. So in that vein, let's talk about what type of backups you have to make sure that in the event that it's illegal to pay the ransom, that you actually can back up to something, right? And you could kind of start going down that path. The other thing I would add is, before you even go in and do that, you need to make sure that you're understanding sort of the statutory or regulatory regimes that business could reasonably fall under. So
Mhm. Mhm.
you could download a copy of my book for free. My next one's coming out here shortly, I'll say, depending upon
Mhm.
how judicious my wife is with my free time. But it's like, if you go in as like a technology guy and you say, hey, you guys really need backups. It's like, okay, they hear that from everybody, right?
Mhm.
If you go in as a technology guy, let's say you go to an accounting firm and you say, okay, I've reviewed your policy. How are you guys complying with IRS publication 4557?
Mhm.
Right? What are you doing to become compliant with the new safeguards rule? Right? That's a totally different discussion.
Mhm.
Right now, like, you're on their side as opposed to trying to sell them something. And I think that would be very, very beneficial.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Again, I don't think a lot of managed service providers think that way, and they go after the traditional target. I may be wrong, but
Mhm.
thanks for sharing that. So as you look through your lens, and I think this is why you're popular in terms of speaking and your books and your YouTube following, because I think this is a new frontier. It's like the Wild West for a lot of us, right? That are used to a structured environment, and you've shed a light on how unstructured this really is. Um, what do you think business leaders, like if you were a business owner right now, what do you think that they need to be aware of that they should do immediately? If you were, like, let's say not so much a corporation, but let's say you're a mid-sized company business owner, privately owned, like what do you think should be in their mindset, given what you know?
So I will give them the same advice that I gave myself last weekend, which is sit down, figure out, okay, when is this hardware going to be end of life? And just go out and buy new stuff, right? So I went out, got two brand new computers, right? Because I'm like, all right, these are going to be end of life in the next 2 years. Went out, got two new cell phones as well for our business. uh, because those were going to be end of life. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is because geopolitically, what we're looking at is potentially massive sanctions on China to the same degree that we have sanctioned Russia, right? So to kind of like parrot Peter Zion here for a little bit, there's a big row right now in the international community due to the war in Ukraine, obviously, right? And I believe Secretary Blinken just went over because China was considering providing additional aid, right? In the term, I'll say in the vein of military material to Russia, right? So if that is to occur, we have to start thinking, okay, what types of sanctions could we actually impose on China? Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of hardware that's made in China. And so I would say, hey, if you're a business owner out there, you got to start thinking this legacy hardware software exclusion, it's coming. You either already have it or it's coming, and you may not even know that it's going to be here until 7 days before your policy renews. And so I would say, go out, sit down with your MSP and say, okay, what's coming up to be end of life here, right? If it's in the next 2 years, I would say just bite the bullet, buy new hardware now, get that off your list. So that way you're not looking at potential disaster. The reason I say that is because we have expended so much material, right, pushing it over to the Ukraine conflict. You can actually see we have plenty of theater commanders right now saying, hey, we don't have enough for our own U.S. military to wage a war right now. Right? Like the Navy in particular came out and was like, hey, we have to replace a lot of stuff because we were running very, very low, right? And that stuff's not cheap. So if China is to provide lethal aid to Russia, or if China is to invade Taiwan, right? Like demographically, there's a whole underlying reason on why it would have to be in the next couple of years as opposed to 10 years from now. If that is to occur, like you can't just build a new server factory in Tennessee overnight. I mean, that would take billions of dollars. There's hundreds of supply chain points. And what we're seeing right now is effectively like the collapse of globalization in real time. So I would say set your business up for success in the next 5 years. Go out there, buy new hardware, sit down with whoever's providing your technology, even if it's an MFP this time, so a multifunction printer, right? I was at the same conference you were, right? Where are all of those printers being made? Or the vast majority of them, I would say. Probably in China, right? That could literally end overnight. And business owners never think of this, but a printer is just a computer on their network that does a very specific job. And so if that printer is a legacy printer, it's no longer supported because you just can't get one, or you didn't want to spring for the latest and greatest model. You could have a huge vulnerability and potentially no cyber insurance if something goes through that particular avenue.
Well, you have another unique lens. I know you spent years in the military. Thank you very much for your service, by the way. So I know you speak with some familiarity with that perspective. One of the things as well that caught me is something new for me anyway, was the vulnerability of the CEO should something happen in a cybersecurity breach. Are you okay just speaking to that before we wrap up? Because I don't think most salespeople understand the compelling reason for the business owner in terms of personal liability.
Yeah. So amongst all the other reasons that I never sleep, I went out and got a master's in cybersecurity law because I was really interested in the legal side of all of this. And I'd pretty much expended all my Google foo points trying to look this stuff up. So then I went to law school. There's a very interesting new case out there called FTC versus Drizzly. And I have a synopsis of this on my YouTube channel. But I think every CEO needs to be aware of this, because the commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission, who, by the way, yes, they've gone after billion-dollar companies. They've also gone after sole proprietors, defunct organizations, small businesses. What they have said is they are tired of CEOs running organizations. They get hit by some type of cyber event, and then the CEO just moves on to the next. So this was the first time ever they put a 10-year personal consent order on the CEO of Drizzly, a guy with the last name of Rellas, Rellas.
Mhm.
And the interesting point of that is that consent order follows him no matter where he goes. So he could switch companies. There is still a litany of mandatory cybersecurity controls that have to be implemented. There's the FTC can walk into your business at any time. There's all of these third-party assessors with specific credentials that you have to get to do this stuff, to then package it together to put to the FTC. The moral of the story is watch the video, but the gist of it is that has effectively made that guy a pariah. Because if you're a board of directors and you're looking for a CEO,
Mhm.
well, who are you going to hire? The guy who comes with baggage from the federal government, or the guy who doesn't come with baggage from the federal government, right? And, if you own your own business, it's like, okay, well, your business could fall victim to this FTC 20-year consent order. If you're a CEO somewhere and you're still thinking about moving up that food chain, that will end for a decade if the FTC comes after you. And what's important to know is the FTC, right? They're kind of setting the gold standard here. And then from that, that's when we kind of see the fallout go out to other various verticals within the government, to other state attorney generals, right? Who are kind of using that as like their blueprint moving forward there. So yeah, watch the video to kind of get the full context there. But like, hey, CEOs, same thing could apply to CIOs, CTOs, CISOs within the organization, even potentially CFOs. All of that could apply to them personally. So unless they're very sure that they will absolutely have a job for the next decade at that one company, no questions asked, which is very unlikely, they need to take that seriously, because that could be a very big problem.
Well, I know in a room of about 300 people, there are a lot of people that are uneasy when you were talking about that, because I think that was you shed some new light on that in terms of the CEO's personal responsibility. So, as we wrap up here, Joe, thanks again for joining us, because I think you got a great message for so many people, not just, the managed service providers that we support from selling cybersecurity, but you're doing a great job educating, from different perspectives, IT, insurance, et cetera. So, for me, takeaways today would be, if you're selling cybersecurity, I thought your point about, going and engaging with whoever the risk manager is, whoever manages the insurance relationship, that's a fresh frontier. I thought that was a great idea you had there, and going through the policy more on the customer side, I thought that was awesome. I thought it was funny how you said, not funny, actually, it's kind of lighthearted humor, I guess, in that the insurance person has no responsibility to understand nor whatever. And I've talked to insurance people since I heard you speak, and they validated that 100%. And, and then you talked about refreshing hardware and stuff like that, which would be music to the ears, of course, to the audience that we speak to. But I know there was a lot more you covered today, but I think from a selling cybersecurity standpoint, I think you got some great ideas that not enough people are using right now. So thanks so much for jumping on today. Now, I know Melissa's got a question. Where do we get a hold of you? Or if someone wanted to, follow you, et cetera, what might that be?
Yes, I've heard you mention YouTube and your books online and your website, all the things. So yeah.
Yeah. So if you just internet search my name, I'm kind of all over the place. You can go to my website. It's thebrunsgroup.com. That's BRUNSGROUP.com, thebrunsgroup.com. You can download my latest cyber insurance and cybersecurity law book there for free. So that'll help out you, your sales team, et cetera, et cetera. You can find me on YouTube. Just search for Joseph Brunsman. I have a whole YouTube channel there with probably well over 100 videos now. I try not to make them hyper technical, but I still get the point across. So they should be somewhat entertaining and useful for everybody. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course, just search for my name. You can find me on Reddit. I'm pretty active in the MSP space there. I'm Joe_cyber. So you can find me there. If anybody has any questions, my email's out there, so they could just give me a holler.
All right. So you're not planning on sleeping anytime in the future?
No.
Anyone can get you from anywhere.
Yeah, I'm currently writing my my fifth book. Actually, is on insurance and risk management for MSPs. So that is, I was a robotics major in college. I was not an English major. And so thank God for AI and spell check.
That's good.
Saves every time.
Hey, thanks very much for joining
Thanks,
us today, Joe. Really appreciate it, Melissa. And we'll see you next time on the Smarketing Show.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.